Have you ever been so far from everything that the world feels like it forgot you? That the map on your phone might as well be a postcard, and the only people who could help are either asleep or 2 hours away. That's the space where ordinary choices turn into nights you can't unremember. I've collected a few of those nights over the years. Some happened to me, some to people I know. And tonight, I want to tell you 4 of them. Each one starts with a simple mistake or a small decision: running low on gas, going for a late hike, sneaking into a place you shouldn't. Each one ends not with neat answers, but with questions that hang in quiet rooms and on long drives home. What follows are true accounts, as best as I can piece them together. I'll tell you what I saw, what I heard, and what I still don't understand. I wasn't trying to be brave in any of these moments. Mostly I was stupid, sometimes careless, and sometimes just unlucky. If there's any through line, it's this: when you're in the middle of nowhere, the margin for error gets tiny. You feel it in your throat. You notice every sound. You notice the way someone's hood hangs at the wrong angle, or how a scream seems to move faster than you can. Story 1. The Hooded Woman at the Roadside. I was 30, barely, and still calling myself a musician, with the conviction of someone who doesn't pay rent on a salary yet. That night, I'd played a bar 3 towns over. The show had gone okay, enough tips in the case to get a pizza, not enough to bail me out of a long drive. The van was older than me in places: dented door, upholstery with a mysterious sticky patch by the passenger seat, a guitar case that rattled if you drove too fast. I had one idea in my head: get home, crash on the couch, sleep through the lingering hum of amps. I knew I was low on gas. I'd been low on everything for months. But in the back of my head, I had that fatal optimism artists have. You'll find another gig. Someone will give you a ride. Your card will go through. I thought I could stretch the tank. I was 2 hours from home, with the highway thinning into a single lane where the trees leaned close like they were listening. There was a 24-hour station a few miles back, one of those fluorescent rectangles on the side of the road that promises salvation. I pulled in, got out, and discovered the pump was dead. The display blinked error. I had $5 cash in my wallet. $5. That's what I had to my name. There are small humiliations you swallow when you're broke. I dug out the 5, fumbled with the credit card slot that wouldn't accept anything, and then tried to Venmo my brother. He'd always cover stupid things for me: gas, coffee, the occasional emergency pizza. My message said something like, "Need help, pump dead," leaving a C note in the console. He didn't answer. I sent a follow-up. Nothing. Signal kept dropping in that strip of highway, like the world was turning a blind eye. I remember the cold of the van's steering wheel, leather slick under my palms. The fluorescent lights of the station were bright and antiseptic, making the shadows behind the pumps look like painted black. I sat there for a long time, thinking of every rational thing I could do. Walk to the town, ask someone for a ride, leave the van, and walk back to the highway. The highway felt like an ocean at night, flat, dangerous, indifferent. I drove off because I convinced myself I could reach home if I pushed it. The gas needle hovered like a dare. I made it maybe 10 miles before the engine hiccuped and died. The van rolled to a stop under the trees. No street lamps, no houses. Just the highway, a shoulder that wasn't wide enough, and the dark. My phone had 1 bar, then none. I sat in the van and realized just how small I was. My breath fogged the window. I texted my brother again. No reply. You get quiet in moments like that. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It presses. There was a smell in the air I can still taste when I retell it. Cold oil and cigarette smoke and something like wet leaves. I locked the doors because it felt stupid not to, like the lock was an actual security blanket. I told myself I would wait until dawn. I kept my hands on the steering wheel and watched the dark like someone watching a TV that might flicker and show a different program. About 20 minutes into the night, I saw movement, 30, maybe 40 feet from the van, down the shallow slope of the shoulder. At first it was just an outline, a darker cutout against darker trees. Then I could make out the shape of a person. They had a hood up, a big one. It swallowed the face. The figure stood perfectly still for a long second, like a statue placed there to be noticed. My pulse shifted into a higher gear. She, or it felt like a she because of the build, the way the hoodie fell, started walking toward the van. No hurry, no purposeful stride. It was as if her feet were moving on their own, slowly, like wind moving a plastic bag. She didn't run. She didn't call out. She moved like someone practicing how not to be seen. The streetlights out at the bend threw the hood in a way that flattened everything. No face, just fabric. I thought about rolling down the window to call to her, to ask if she needed help. I thought about unlocking the doors and letting a stranger near. Instead, I hit the deadlock. The van's engine was off. The world felt like it had pulled its breath in around me. My fingers trembled on the wheel. She stopped roughly in line with the passenger door, maybe 10 feet away. Close enough I could have thrown something and hit her hoodie. Close enough I could have seen her face if she turned. She didn't. She just stood there and watched. The air between us was a thick thing. I fumbled for my phone. I was going to record her. I figured I'd get proof, something to show my brother, something to share if what? If I disappeared. The idea sounded stupid even as it bubbled up. I tapped record. When the phone lit, she moved. Not fast, not sudden, but she pivoted in the space of a breathing second and walked up to the passenger window. Her hand came up and hit the glass. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a hard, hollow bang that vibrated the cheap plastic of the door as if it wanted to test whether the glass would break. My phone slipped out of my hand. It clattered across the seat, hit the console, and slid under the glove box. I remember the exact sound, that soft, metallic roll, like coins falling in slow motion. Then something else happened that I still can't explain. From inside the hoodie, there came a sound. It wasn't words. It wasn't a voice in the normal sense. It was a low, wet grunting, an animal sound someone might make when trying to imitate a person but failing. It crawled along the glass. It made my teeth ache. I remember thinking, weirdly, that this was exactly the kind of thing you hear in late-night horror movies. My rational brain supplied plausible ideas. Maybe she had a throat issue, maybe she was drunk, maybe she was sick, or nothing at all. None of those ideas helped. I panicked. I grabbed for the guitar in the back seat. I don't know why I grabbed it. Maybe because it felt like the only thing I owned that made noise and could be a weapon, or because it reminded me of home. I slung it over my shoulder, shoved my keys into my hand, and opened the door. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I saw the hood turn, the figure take a step, and then start moving down the road. She walked the same direction I was headed, toward the town. But she was walking in that same slow, deliberate way, like she was leaving a trail of time behind her. I ran because standing there felt like being baited. I ran because something about that grating noise had crawled under my skin. I ran, and I kept stealing glances back, and she was always there, walking the same slow pace, never catching up, always keeping the same distance. It felt impossible, like being paced by a shadow. I remember the sound of my own shoes on the gravel, and my lungs burning, and the guitar strap cutting into my shoulder. After what felt like forever and 5 minutes, daylight began to edge the horizon. Dawn came like someone slowly turning on a dimmer. I flagged a car at the entrance to town and told them to call my brother. The driver was a young woman who smelled like coffee and was confused but kind. She pulled into a gas station with me, and I sat and tried to collect myself. My hands trembled for hours. The van was still sitting where I left it. I'd left the keys in the ignition because I was stupid and wanted to make sure I could get back in quickly. My brother showed up half an hour later, grumbling about traffic, and probably about how irresponsible I was. He was practical and steady and furious, in that particular way brothers are. We drove back out to the van together. The shoulder was empty, the van's back door was open, not ajar, fully unlatched. The guitar case was unzipped. Nothing, as far as we could tell, was missing. There were no footprints around that suggested a living person had been, rummaging. No signs that anyone had slept there. No cigarette butts, no discarded bottles. There was just the sense that someone had been there, had interacted with the van, had possibly touched the glass, and then had left. I made the obvious jokes to deflect. Maybe she was a serial hoodie collector, and my brother gave me the look that is both pity and reprimand. We checked the van thoroughly. The glove compartment was closed. The passenger door looked like it had been pounded. My phone was smashed under the glove box, but functional enough to make calls. My brother offered to drive me home that day and insisted I never go out at night without some spare cash again. I promised him I wouldn't. I meant it. There are 3 parts to most late-night mysteries: what you did, what you saw, and what you can prove. I had a memory and a slightly cracked phone and a brother who wanted me to be safe. But I had no answers. No arrest, no camera footage from the station showing someone in a hoodie, no other witnesses. When I drove the van back to the station later with a spare tank of gas, the clerk shrugged, said the pumps had been finicky lately, and asked why I was asking about someone wandering around at night. I said nothing about the banging or the grunting or the way the hood hid a face. It felt ridiculous to lay it out there as if it were evidence. What I still can't shake is that pace. The slow, slow walk away. People walk off at night all the time, sure, but the memory is of a figure that didn't hurry, a person who didn't run, who didn't flee, who could have reached over and opened the passenger door if they'd wanted. Instead, she stayed just outside the radius where I felt I could act. That's what feels wrong, how deliberate she was about being at the edge of me and not inside me at all. After that night, I started carrying cash in the right pocket. I never trusted a pump display without a second opinion. I learned the weight of a humble $5 bill and how it can be the difference between being stranded and getting to a light. And I never, ever drive with an empty tank on a route I don't know. If that story hit the right kind of nerve and you want more real night things like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the rest. Story 2. Screams in the Woods. We used to go into the woods for the same reason a lot of couples do, because it was quiet and safe in the way our city lives weren't. Jackie and I had a thing about twilight hikes, not the Instagram kind with matching outfits and pose smiles, but the kind where you were trying to outrun the day and thinking about nothing much at all. Jackie had this habit of finding little paths that cut through dense growth, places where you could be alone, and the phone would throw up its hands, and the map would say, "Good luck." We called it therapy. The trees seemed to take things in. The night it started, the sky was the flat blue-grey of a summer heatwave breaking. Crickets were loud in a way that made you aware of each small life around you. The trail was mostly clear, packed earth, a couple of routes you watch out for. We'd been hiking for an hour, not talking about anything serious, easy conversation, the worst albums we'd heard that week, a neighbor's garden fence that was falling down. Jackie was ahead of me, hands shoved in the pockets of her hoodie, humming under her breath. The woods had a particular smell, sap and moss, and the damp, sweet rot of autumn that hasn't quite arrived. At first the sound came from far away, a high, thin noise that could have been an animal or a radio left in a car. We paused. Jackie looked at me with the kind of small smile that means, "Isn't this nice?" And then the sound sharpened. It changed shape. What had been a distant animal call became a human sound, a scream. It was a pitched, raw thing that rose and then tore off like a rag being ripped. Not a cinematic scream, not someone shouting for fun. It was full of anger and fear and pleading. It cut through the trees and kept going, finding a way between trunks like it knew where we weren't supposed to be. We both stopped, suspended in the kind of silence that happens when something should be familiar and isn't. The scream didn't last long, maybe 20 seconds, but it echoed. It left a ringing in the ears that felt like a presence. Jackie's hand found mine. The first thing I thought stupidly was that someone was doing something stupid, yelling for attention or messing with hikers. My second thought, a colder one, was that someone was hurt. We walked toward the sound because we were curious and because we were responsible people who wanted to check on others. The sound didn't seem to get closer. It was like a bird call when you try to chase it. Every time we angled to the left, it slid to the right. It was maddening the way it never sat still. Where other noises in the woods had a source you could triangulate, this scream seemed to live in the canopy. Our steps were careful. Every crackle and snap sounded way too loud. The woods that had felt like therapy 5 minutes earlier turned into something with teeth. We found a backpack hanging from a low branch, not on the trail itself but off to the side, like someone had set it there and stepped away. It was an ordinary pack. Nylon, faded, the zipper half open. Inside we found a couple of things that didn't add up. A phone charger, one of those cheap cords that always seems to twist into knots. A small, inexpensive pocket knife, the kind people keep for camping tasks. And a little card folded down, creased as if it had been carried for a while. I opened it, thinking for a second I might find a name or a note. The inside had one short line in a child's scrawl. Love, Mom. The items were nothing and everything. They spoke to ordinary life, to someone who packed a charger because they intended to be back before dark. The card felt like evidence someone was loved by someone else. There were no signs of a struggle nearby. No blood, no trampled plants or overturned packs. Just those few objects and a trail of an impossible scream. We called the police. We waited with our breath shallow until they came. Officers were cautious, polite, and thorough in a way that made you trust the process without guaranteeing its outcome. They took our statement. They combed the trail with flashlights and dogs. They checked missing person reports. In the end, there was no match, no report that aligned with those particular items or the timeline we insisted on. The backpack was turned over to evidence and catalogued with a case number that never found a body or a person who fit the description. The phenomenon that bothered me more than the lack of a missing person was the sound itself. It was a scream that didn't seem to have a source. We'd been hikers long enough to know how sound plays tricks, how ridges channel voices and hollow logs throw them back at you. But this one seemed to play hide-and-seek in a more deliberate way. It would swell, get unbearably close, then drop off to a whisper that moved in a direction none of us had walked. Jackie stopped hiking twilight trails after that. I tried to be understanding. She used to say the woods had been a sanctuary, and then the sanctuary turned into a place where something that might be a person could disappear. It made her feel small in the way you feel when you realize your assumptions about the world were naive. We still talked about it, but the conversation had a different tone, an edge of caution that hadn't been there before. I still go out sometimes, but not at dusk, and never alone. We didn't get answers. A few weeks after the backpack turned up, I checked the local missing persons registry online. No one matched the profile. The police let us know they reviewed nearby hospitals and shelter intakes, and they followed up on leads that fizzled. The case cooled into a quiet file. That's what unsettles you more than the scream itself. The idea that a life, if there was a life, can be folded into a pack and then evaporate from the places we expect people to be. When Jackie and I went back to the trail a month later, just to walk, not to look, we stood at the spot where the backpack had hung and looked around. The trees were the same, the light was the same, the air smelled of moss. Everything had gone on like normal, only we were different. That night taught me that some sounds aren't just noises, they're questions. And sometimes questions have no answers. We kept talking about it in the months after. We wondered about pranksters, about lost kids, about people who walked into the woods and never wanted to be found. Most nights, when I tried to sleep, I could still hear a kind of thin, keening echo of that scream. I never heard it again, but I hear echoes in a way you only notice after something cuts a line across what you thought was continuous. If that was where the night had paused, just the backpacks and the unanswered scream, that would have been bad enough. But there's more to the story, and it's one of those moments where curiosity and that old, stupid bravado push you towards something you probably shouldn't follow. We left the scene with copies of our statements and a polite officer telling us to keep our phones charged. As we walked back to the trailhead, a soft wind moved the leaves, and the woods reclaimed its ordinary soundtrack. Birds argued over territory. A distant car hummed on a road we hadn't noticed before. Jackie's grip on my hand tightened and then relaxed. We were both thinking the same thing. It's better not to go looking for ghosts, and yet, of course, we did. We talked quietly about whether to go deeper. We rationalized it. The police had checked the immediate area, they'd searched the known trails, and there was nothing to suggest anyone was currently in danger. The voice of reason was persuasive until curiosity took over. If someone had been there, what would have made them leave a backpack and vanish? If someone had been hurt, could we help? Those questions are fast little insects that buzz in your ear until you swat them with a decision. We decided to follow the sound a little further. Not far, just far enough to see if it came back. We made sure our phones were on, that we had our headlights. Jackie's face looked small in the cone of light. We stepped past the place where the backpack had hung and into trees that got denser, the trunks closer together and the trail narrower. The air was cooler under canopy. The world dimmed. Branches scraped jackets. The ground was uneven. We moved carefully, whispering like conspirators, like teenagers on a dare. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint and fragile at first, the sound came again. Not a scream, maybe a sob, an animal whisper that could be a frog or a human thing. It moved as before in that way that defied geometry. We angled left. It shifted right. We angled right. It moved again, sliding ahead of us, always just out of reach. Each time it felt closer. Each time it pulled away. I can still feel the tension of that walk. The forest had compressed. The noise pooled between trunks and then vanished. My breath got shallow. Jackie stopped and said, "We should call the police again." I agreed. But before I could hit the call button, the sound rose into something that made my chest seize, a raw, desperate cry that split the air. It was close, too close. And that's where I'll leave this one for now, right at the moment when we decided to press on, and the woods answered in a way that made us both regret curiosity. It was close, too close. The cry tore the air and then condensed into a direction that made my stomach drop. Jackie grabbed my arm, hard this time, and I fumbled my phone like a lifeline. For a second the woods seemed to lean in, as if the trunks themselves were listening. Then something moved. Not a shadow, not a whisper, but the quick, low motion of something running between the trees, breaking small branches, hitting underbrush. It went past us like a body shoved through a curtain of leaves. For a heartbeat I thought, finally we'll find the source. We pushed forward, adrenaline doing half the work for our legs. A shape flashed ahead, dark clothing, hunched, too quick to be an animal. It crossed the trail and vanished into thicker growth. We called out, our voices small and stupid in that place. No answer, only the wet sound of leaves as the thing moved away. The smell changed, damp, metallic for a second, then gone. My throat tightened. Since I'm painfully honest about poor choices, I'll admit we chased 10, 15 yards. The trail narrowed. Every step felt like stepping into someone else's memory. Then we hit a clearing of sorts, a shallow ravine where a tree had fallen years ago and the trail skirted around it. That's where we saw evidence someone had been there very recently. A cigarette butt crushed against a root, a flattened patch of moss that suggested a brief hurried rest, and footprints that were not ours, pressed into soft earth. 2 sets, side by side, and then nothing. They left the main path and tracked toward a stand of young birch that knitted together like fingers. Jackie reached for the backpack first. I remember the scrap of nylon buzzing in my hands. For a second, all the terror condensed into something almost ordinary. Zippers, straps, a smudged logo. We rifled again. The charger, the cheap folding knife, the card with "Love Mom," and then, tucked deeper than before, a small, flattened photograph. It was blurred by time and rain, but you could make out a face. Not sharp, not recent. A corner was missing, like an unmade choice. We both stared at it too long. The police came back with flashlights and a professional calm that made me simultaneously grateful and stupid for being human. They asked practical questions when we'd first heard the scream, how long between the sounds, which way the footprints led. They marked trees with neon tape and brought a dog that sniffed along the trail and then lost the scent in a tangle of roots. They ran registry checks and cross-reference calls from nearby towers. They were thorough. They did everything that decent officers do when they can, but the result was the same as the week before. No matching missing person, no hospital intake with a timeline that fit, no other witnesses. The backpack was logged. The photograph went into evidence. A report sat in a file. Here's the thing. You don't get the cinematic payoff. No SWAT teams, no overnight search parties, no triumphant closure. In small towns, weird stuff folds into paperwork and time. People go back to mowing lawns and calling their dogs. You take the bus to work. The woods keep doing what woods do. Sway, decompose, pretend it did nothing. For a while the police called when they found odd items, and we answered. I went to the station twice. I signed forms. I'd learned case numbers the way other people learn playlists. Maybe you think there's a satisfying villain here, someone who likes to play tricks on hikers, a kid with a recorder. And maybe that's true in some instances. Maybe the scream was a recording of some kind, someone trying to make a point, or an injured person calling for help and then walking away, or a trap set by someone who likes the sound of panic. All are possible. None are confirmed. What I remember most from that night isn't the objects or the police statements. It's the way the scream behaved. It had a pattern, almost a taunt. It moved like a thing that understood how to avoid capture. When we angled left, it pivoted right. When we thought we'd cornered it, it slipped through the substrate of trunks and roots, as if the woods were designed to hide whatever it came from. It felt like the scream belonged to something that had practiced being elusive. Jackie stopped going on twilight hikes after that. She didn't ban woods from our life completely. It wasn't a dramatic severance. But dusk hikes, the kind we used to do where the land felt like it accepted your secrets, those vanished. She said the woods had shifted from sanctuary to stage. For her, the question of whether a person was out there who needed help, or whether someone was playing a cruel game, didn't matter. The idea that the woods could keep a secret like that was enough to make her not want to share an evening trail with it anymore. That's the hard part of these things. The answers don't always matter to the person who's afraid. Closure helps investigators. For the rest of us, what lingers is that split-second awareness that the world holds spaces where normal rules weaken. The scream lives in me in the way an ambered memory does, beautiful and unsettling at once. We kept in touch with the officer who had taken the case. He called from time to time to say the file hadn't produced more leads. He was kind, but resigned in the way of people who see too many unfulfilled mysteries. A year later, a new volunteer group organized a search of a nearby reserve after someone else reported similar noises, but that too petered out. There was no harmonized set of evidence that linked episodes. Just a series of small things, a pack, a call, a vanished sound, that accumulated into fear. What we learned is not heroic. We learned not to go into the woods without letting someone know exactly where we were. We learned how sound can lie. We learned how the mind, once marked by an odd event, will replay little moments like a scratched record. What clothes you wore, the light on a particular tree, the exact break of a branch. Jackie learned that a single strange scream was enough to reorder her relationship with the place she used to love. I learned that curiosity paired with stubbornness will often make a 2-hour mystery into a lifetime of small, cautious habits. Story 3. Trapped in an abandoned school. Tanya and I were 19, convinced we understood the world, and horribly wrong. The road trip was what you did back then. Cheap gas, cheap music, high spirits. We chased ghost stories for fun, driving down country lanes to look at boarded windows and empty bleachers. It was a time when trespassing seemed like an art form, and consequences were a game you could avoid by being quick and quiet. The school, no one ever knew if it was a church-school hybrid, but to us it read like a ritual place where time had folded up and left. It had the kind of decay that makes film aficionados drool, flaking paint, the faint graffiti of boredom and aspiration. A gym door that hung slightly open, and a hallway that split into wings like a cross. We walked the length of that long corridor, our flashlights fanning across peeling murals and the oily gloss of the floor where water had tracked in and dried. At first it felt like the best kind of trespass, an adventure with adrenaline and the thrill of being young. We joked about being archaeologists, about ghosts who would tell us which teacher had loved which locker. We took pictures with our phones and posted them later, as if our misdeed were a postcard to the future. Teenage hubris wrapped us in a kind of immunity. We believed briefly that nothing bad happened to people like us. Then the building breathed. The sound was subtle at first, a distant thump like someone testing a basketball. We paused in the cross-shaped junction where the hall split into the old classrooms and the gym wing. Tanya's flashlight cut the gloom. Dust motes danced like tiny planets. Then we heard it again, a footfall, heavier this time, 3 beats, and a hollow pause. It was not the scuttle of a raccoon. It was a human cadence. Someone was in the building. We tried the adult rationalizations. Maybe a squatter, maybe a caretaker. Maybe another kid with a flashlight and worse judgment than ours. We decided stubbornly to move toward the gym. The gym felt safer in a way. Broad, echoing space where you could see movement from a distance. It was unlocked when we stepped into it. An unlocked gym at midnight is a crime scene of poor security, we thought. We joked about being the protagonists of a horror movie, as if that would absolve us of the trespass itself. Then heavy steps closed in behind us. They were deliberate and fast, like someone shifting from walking to chasing. The sound of them filled the corridor and ricocheted off lockers. Tanya grabbed my arm. We started running because the building had become something else, a maze, a metal throat. We're young, we run poorly, but with the conviction of youth. We reached the gym door at a sprint. It was the one route we'd used to enter. It was our way out. In the stress, in the blind panic of that 3 or 4 seconds, we lunged at the handle. It didn't turn. Tanya jimmied it. It didn't budge. For a terrible second, my brain passed the situation like a bad joke. The door had been unlocked when we went in. Now it was locked. The hallway behind us filled with the sound of someone pounding the floor in steps, multiple hard feet beating toward the gym. The chase tightened into a single edge of need. We smashed a window because we were stupid, in the old adolescent way, immediately choosing damage over rationality. We found a trash can, hefted it, and hurled it through a low, dumb window that led to a maintenance alley. Glass laced the air, a bright rain. I don't know who plans those moves in horror movies. In real life, it's panic and the weight of wasted chances. We climbed through and hit the alley in a stunned coughing heap. The cold air was a shock. Our adrenaline flashed and then left us trembling. We ran to the car and fled, driving under the halo of sodium lights and the sound of diesel engines. We didn't call the police. Not then. We had trespassed. We had smashed a window. Calling would have been both confession and embarrassing immaturity. We left with guilt braided through our fear. We told ourselves the obvious. The person or persons chasing us were probably a drifter or a security guard who'd locked the doors and then wanted to scare off kids. Later, friends suggested an animal had been responsible for the thumping. Maybe a raccoon in the rafters could sound big when it slid along a beam. Those were kinder explanations. They didn't change the tightness that snaked up through my ribs when I pictured those footsteps. When I thought about the locked door from the other side, I still think about what could have explained that locked gym door. Was someone in that building already? Had they closed us in on purpose? Did someone else live there, shuffling between rooms and not wanting to be found? We left with a small, poisonous knowledge. If you break into a place at night, you might find other people who have chosen the dark as a refuge. We left with guilt in our mouths and a shattered window to explain if anyone had been watching. Years later, I would tell this story with the sheepishness of age. Tanya and I, exes now, exchange looks and a muted laugh when the memory comes up. We both learned in our own ways about trespassing and boundaries and the arrogance of thinking a place belongs to your curiosity. We also learned that sometimes the threat is less important than the consequence. The fear whispered in that hallway was real for a few breaths, but the thing that never fully resolved was the feeling that we'd been intruded upon by someone who could have easily closed a door and locked us in. We matured. We told the story in bars as if it were a tale of bravery. Mostly it's a story I tell now to say, don't break into abandoned buildings. It's a stupid thing to do. The world had a way of folding me into mistakes I could have avoided. Story 4. Lost, trapped between rocks and the flannel man. When I say I learned a lot from being an idiot, what I mean is that I learned the consequences of trusting people too quickly and the shape of my limits. This last story is the one people ask me about the most, probably because it leans into that 127 hours comparison and because there is a man in a red flannel who looks like he was drawn wrong. It started like any dumb hiking trip. Derek, who was a friend I trusted enough to let steer the conversation toward poor decisions, had convinced a handful of us to take a lesser-known trail that promised views and solitude. Derek loved that phrase, solitude, because it meant no cell signal, no people, and therefore no consequences for his habit of cutting corners. He pointed us down an unmarked path with the confidence of someone who reads blogs too often. We should have said no. We didn't. At one point, the trail narrowed to a single ribbon of footpath that hugged a bluff. The drop was not dramatic at first, just enough to make you mindful of where you put your feet. The rock was slick with a film of moss in places. I was ahead, balancing a little too confidently on a stretch that had the nickname the Goat Walk, for good reason. My foot found wet rock where it shouldn't have. My ankle twisted. I fell. I tumbled in a way that felt like the earth had decided to reconfigure itself just beneath me. I bounced, slid, and came to rest between two slabs of stone, pressed tight like a folding chair stuck half-closed. It's a small, humiliating thing to be trapped. Very quickly, you realize your body is not theoretical. It resists. My shoulder burned. My breath was a racket. My friends called down to me 100 feet above, their voices hollow and useless. Derek was somewhere near the top, voice sharp with the kind of practical panic that tries to be useful. You try to wiggle. You find that movement is a calculus of pain. You measure angles and weight with a precision you never had in school. Time stretches when you're stuck. The sun leans. Shadows get longer. The light died and turned flat. My friends tried to think like rescuers. They called 911 and then argued about how they'd get me out. We joked, badly, about book deals and who would sign my sweater. The jokes are a small theatre of denial. Hours passed and my options narrowed. The idea of cutting off my limb never crossed my mind the way it does in movies. In real life you think, my phone battery will die, my mouth is dry, the rock presses into my ribs. You start to say goodbye in small ways. Remember that time, tell my sister I love her. Because the mind wants to be practical, even in absurdity. And then someone else came into the scene. At first I thought he was a hallucination, formed from dehydration, from the hunger of being stuck. He was tall and thin, with a red flannel shirt that already had a smell of motor oil and something fried. A narrow moustache sat under his nose like punctuation, and glasses caught the last light and spit it back. He appeared as if unremarkably stepping out from between two trees, like someone who had known this bluff his whole life and decided to make a habit of walking it at dusk. He did not hurry to help in the cinematic sense. He knelt, and then, with the steady patience of someone who does this sort of thing, lifts and leverages, he worked me free. There was a weird, mechanical efficiency to his movements. He talked while he moved, voice low and a little sing-song, offering statements more than questions. You're stuck. You're where folks get dumb. Hold that there. Nudu. He said my name, which is the detail that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. I hadn't told him my name. He said it like someone confident he already knew how the story should go. He did a small thing that made me trust him despite the oddness. He handed me a bottle of water. When someone gives you water in a situation where you are fragile, there's a small chemical shift in your brain toward trust. I drank like an animal after a drought. He then insisted I come with him just a little way because my friends were over there waiting. The phrasing was strangely emphatic. He said he'd show me a shortcut to the ridge, something about a path he used when he was younger. He made a hand gesture, like someone indicating a map that was only in his head. I was exhausted and probably gullible. I should have stayed with my friends. Stupid choices pile up. I followed for a short while because I didn't want to argue at that moment with someone who'd just saved my life. He walked with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. He kept his gaze slightly averted, as if not to stare at me like a curiosity. He spoke in half sentences about the land and about people who got lost because they think they know the way. There was nothing explicitly threatening in his words, but there was a wrongness about the insistence, like someone trying to put you on the stage before you realize you're an actor. We reached a clearing. A shed stood there, small and squat, the paint peeled. A screen door clung on one hinge. My friends were nowhere to be seen in the clearing. The man in the flannel pointed toward the building and said, "You'll be fine. They'll be right there." He knocked on the door with a slow, polite rhythm, then turned to me and smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. He waved me inside as if to prove the point. And then I heard it. The sound of two sets of footsteps approaching from behind the shed, not necessarily threatening, just purposeful, the way someone approaches because they know where they are. The man in the flannel stiffened in a way that made the hair on my forearm stand up. He muttered something under his breath about company arriving and urged me through the door. My instincts screamed. I had the sudden, sickly certainty that I was no longer just someone who'd been freed. I was an object in a story someone else was telling. I bolted. The decision was raw and immediate. I ran not toward the trail, but away from the shed, toward a thicket that could hide a person sensibly. My heart hammered so loud I thought the two sets of footsteps would sync with it. Something chased. Two figures broke from the tree line after me, rapid, boots crunching. I dove into a tangle of branches and made myself small. That night was a study in sound. The proximity of breath, the quality of leaves breaking, the metallic click of a ring on a hand. For hours I lay there, pressed to the earth and listening to the forest move around me. When dawn puckered the sky, I crawled out and ran until a road appeared, and a car with real people stopped for me. They were bewildered, then compassionate. I flagged them down like someone guilty of making an alarming scene. They took me to a diner and called the ranger station. My friends, who'd been searching frantically, found me soon after in a tangle of gratitude and anger. Derek's face when he saw me was a long mix of relief and guilty self-reproach. He admitted later that he had not known of any shed or flannel man. He'd simply misled the route to find a shorter return and then panicked when I fell. Rangers came out with search teams. They combed the area where the shed was supposed to stand, the scrub where I'd been handed water, where the man had knocked on the door, where 2 sets of footsteps pursued me. They searched and researched it. The shed, if it had ever been there, was gone. No foundation, no sloping ground, nothing that matched the memory of a building where I'd been led. They photographed the area, grid-searched for prints, used me as a guide to the best of my broken memory. We walked the bluff in circles, like surgeons trying to stitch together a missing piece of fabric. This is where the story splits in explanations. There are people who say, I hallucinated because of dehydration and panic. That's a reasonable hypothesis. There are people who say someone used an old, movable hunting blind or a temporary shelter to be near the trail, something that can be assembled and disassembled. There are people who point at the flannel man's manner and say he was benign and just socially awkward. All are possibilities. None are confirmed. I don't have proof of him beyond my memory. I have the taste of motor oil in my nose when I try to recall the visual of glasses catching the light, the feeling of my ribs being pressed by 2 slabs of rock. I have no arrest records, no surveillance footage, just the story. What I do have is changed behavior. I don't go off-trail anymore. I don't take someone else's shortcut. I move with a kind of procedural caution I didn't used to possess. I carry a whistle now, ridiculous as that sounds. I learned to value the small, painfully practical ways of staying safe because of what happened, how quickly the terrain, a friend's casual direction, and a stranger's insistence could put you somewhere you didn't want to be. The Rangers were professional and kind. They wrote their notes, offered counseling resources, and then, like many official responses, moved on when there was no hard evidence to follow. They did what they could. Later, when we tried to relocate the shed with a map and coordinates and the kind of focus an official search requires, we came up blank. The land had no sign of a building there. My friends would sometimes, in quieter hours, ask me if I wanted to go back and look again. We did. The place refused to reveal what I insisted I had seen, aftermath and reflection. So there you have it. 4 nights, 4 ways of being small in a big world. Each one began with an ordinary choice that left a margin for danger. Gas, curiosity, youthful trespass, trust in a stranger. Each one ended incompletely. A hooded woman who walked away, a scream that slipped between trees, a locked gym door, a flannel man who might have been a neighbor or a stranger or an invention of stress. None of the stories offers satisfying closure. That's part of the point. The terror often isn't what you can definitively name. It's the zone of uncertainty that opens up when ordinary rules stop applying. Being in the middle of nowhere removes layers of security you take for granted in a city. Quick help, bright lights, witnesses. That absence concentrates choices until they feel more like bets than plans. I could sit here and moralize, don't be foolish, carry cash, tell someone where you're going. Those are fair and true, but they're not the whole story. The harder thing to admit is that sometimes you will do all the right things and still find yourself in a situation that makes no sense. You can be careful and still be unsettled. You can obey every safety tip and still be left with a hum of fear that has no neat cause. That's the real terror. The idea that some of the world's edges are just holes we fall into. If you listen to these stories and feel something stir in your chest, that's normal. Good. Let it be a kind of humility, not just fear. There's a terrible bravery in admitting you were wrong about the shape of a place or about how safe you felt. There's a grace to learning, slowly, to respect the small practical things that keep us steady: gas in the tank, a trusted day plan, a boundary you won't cross again. If you made it this far, and these stories sat with you the way they sit with me, like a cold stone in a pocket, tell me which one unsettled you most in the comments. If you've got a middle-of-nowhere story of your own, share it. I read them all. And if you want more nights like this, more accounts of meaningless things turning meaningful in the dark, hit subscribe and stick around. It helps me tell the next one. In the end, the scariest part of being in the middle of nowhere is how much you can't know. You're small, your options are thin, and sometimes the world closes its doors for reasons you'll never understand. That's the truth that stayed with me after all of this. Sometimes escape is a dumb luck, sometimes it's a stranger with water, and sometimes it's just the light coming up. But whatever it is, keep your tank from hitting empty, keep your head clear, and try not to follow the man in the red flannel into a place you can't later explain.